The reason why I like to begin with this article is because we're going to talk about any kind of SEL or socially emotional learning components. It really begins with the relationship between you and the students. And I'm going to also suggest that in part, it's the relationship between the students and the other students. We're going to be exploring more of that over the next couple of weeks. That being said, I think this article raised some interesting viewpoints, and we'll take some time to share them. So can I get someone to offer a paraphrase for us? Okay, Elizabeth, thank you.
Yeah, so my paraphrase was, this reading was about the impact that a teacher can have on a student's long-term love of learning and how teachers need to cultivate a relationship to spark interest and curiosity in their students.
Good, thank you, yeah. Again, we sometimes think about the fourth R, reading, writing, arithmetic, and then relationships being the fourth R. And I want to suggest to you that particularly at secondary school, secondary level, we need to pay particular attention to that aspect, because it's probably one of the best resources we have in terms of our teaching and our classroom management. Okay, Elizabeth, would you pick somebody to give another paraphrase? And if you want to offer one, raise your hand.
Okay. Sure. Taylor, let's do it.
Got your hand up. Good.
So mine wasn't as good as yours, Elizabeth, but it says strong relationships in the classroom provide trust and engagement for students and joy and a love for teaching for teachers.
Good. Okay. So again, with teaching, if we're not having fun, then we need to really think seriously about what we're doing. And it's not always fun, but certainly relationships have a way of keeping that spark going. Okay, thank you, Taylor. Would you pick somebody to share a word? And if you want to share, just put a hand up or something.
I'll pick Mike Creed.
Mike, I think you're muted.
Sorry, instrumental focus was my first one.
Okay.
I was interested in that. It's a one-way, mostly one-way relationship style where teachers get little small bits of information and use them to motivate students, but it's not as much as two-way as one of the other forms that was mentioned, the reciprocal.
Okay, all right. Did anybody else have instrumental focus, by the way? Yeah, some people did. Okay. All right, let's hear another choice. Would you pick somebody, Mike?
I'll go with Michael.
Okay.
What was that last thing you said, Professor? Do you want me to do a specific word or any word?
He had instrumental focus.
Okay, one of the words I used was engage. Actually, okay, I'll do that. That's fine. This was used in the context of engaging authority versus simply abiding by it. My students abide authority, but only at the threat of physical violence. They are the students who are not taught to engage authority, but knew that they should not abide it either. And the result is criminality. They were not about to actively realize their needs and dreams without feeling like they had to break the system of authority because they were not taught.
Yeah, and you're working with incarcerated youth, right?
Incarcerated adults.
Oh, adults. Okay, all right. Yeah, that's a different ballgame altogether.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, would you pick someone to share another word?
Oh, sure. I don't know. Laura, can I pick on you? Yeah.
Yes, I was talking about the teachers shouldn't, in my opinion, the teachers shouldn't share personal stories if they are, even though they are purpose and appropriate to the discussion, because I was commenting to my group is like I share personal story and it was purposely, but now it's like my students are like just to say I was born and raised in Mexico. Over there I get my bachelor's degree, but now I am here. I am if I did it, you can do it, right? It's with purpose to tell them. But now I feel like they are not respecting me because I said I was born in Mexico, and now they are like not paying attention. No, they are not respectful. I don't think teachers should share personal stories with them, with the students.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Will you pick somebody else to share a word?
Yes, I think Michelle.
Okay, one of them I chose caution, because there was actually a huge warning about it. Just because that you have a relationship with the students doesn't mean you're friends with them, especially on social media. You need to remind yourself that you're responsible adults still. Yeah, sure, you can be friends with the students and everything, but you still need to know the morals, basically.
You know, it's interesting. In my experience, what I found is that when there's a breach of that separation, it's usually because of the teacher and not the student. So when we talk about being a, quote, friend, we're not really a friend. And I always discourage people from doing anything with students on social media, period. And secondly, they know the line because they've been in school now 6, 7, 8 years. So they know the line between when they're over it and when they're not. So be aware that some may try to bait you into, getting into a situation, but you have to really be on guard, and particularly with the advent of social media. Schools usually have email where you can communicate with parents, etc., and even the kid. But beyond that, you don't want to move into any other kind of areas where it's too risky. So that's a good caution, and caution is a good word to use for that as well. Okay, thank you. Would you pick somebody else to share another word?
Let's try Kat.
I chose relationship. I wrote that the article discusses how important student-teacher relationships are and how they're connected to student successes. And sometimes I feel like students don't prioritize this. When a student notices that that a teacher likes them, they're more likely to respect them and want to learn and put in effort.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to throw out a word here and see if anybody had one. Reciprocal focus. Anybody have that one?
Yeah, I have that one.
Yes.
Okay, Leah, could you mind sharing what you thought of, and then we'll go to Elizabeth.
Sure. Well, I kind of wrote about reciprocal focus in two different areas. I chose it as a word where I put it is important to that respect and rapport and so many other aspects of a student. Sorry, I'm splitting the screen, so it's, how that goes on a small laptop. But I put that it is important that respect, rapport, and so many other aspects of a student-teacher relationship are reciprocated between both parties, and that, should I go into my question and pondering at the bottom?
Sure.
Okay. So one of the things that I questioned, I was really interested in I just wonder why the majority of teachers that follow the one-way instrumental focus tend to end up in low-income and high-minority schools, while teachers that are trained to focus on a more reciprocal approach end up in the more affluent schools with predominantly white students.
Okay.
So I'm just so curious in how that happens, and why is there such a strong correlation of going one way or the other?
Yeah.
I'm just really interested.
Okay, so just for the sake of argument, let me review with you the whole idea behind reciprocal focus. Okay, it says to develop a holistic understanding of their students, inviting students to grapple with content and problems together. So there's an element of collaboration that's involved in here, right? That's implied in the quote. These students not only learn to think for themselves, but also had adults who affirmed and responded to their thoughts and experiences. Such interactions prepared them to engage with authority figures and to someday hold positions of authority themselves, which also implies a greater sense of social emotional understanding. The instrumental focus is more focused on dispensing information. Okay, so here's my take on the differences. The reciprocal approach, being that it's reciprocal, would imply, in my thinking, a more student-centered, focused classroom. Whereas the instrumental focus is more do the work, collect the work, grade the work, and a lack of emphasis on having much of a relationship with students. It's not that they don't, but it's not emphasized. So here's my thinking, because your question is, why does one group end up at one place versus the other? So if you think about an affluent school where there's a very high socioeconomic status, you can probably have more latitude in your attitude around being relational with the students because there's less conflict, okay? Because the school is a better sense of equilibrium. In the schools where I worked, which were mainly inner city schools, there's more of an issue of needing to control and less of an emphasis on building strong relationships. And so the emphasis is on control and getting information across. So I see two distinct focus areas based upon those areas of reciprocal versus instrumental. Now, I think the reason why people end up more frequently in schools with a background of instrumental focus is twofold. One is in your educational training, your credential program, I would venture to guess that much of the time is spent, and maybe not so much at CSUN, but typically at other universities and teacher training institutions, more on the instructional side and the assessment, the instruction, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in a teacher program like CSUN, there may be an emphasis on building student relationships, on more group work, on more student-to-student interaction, which would imply more of a reciprocal focus. So that's one distinction. The other distinction is that where do you think most new teachers end up in their first teaching job? It's in high-impact, high-poverty schools where there's a lot of turnover. And in schools that have a high SES, high socioeconomic status, there's probably less turnover. So you have to go where the jobs are, right? So I know when I started teaching, most of the jobs back in 1973 were in inner city, high impact, high poverty schools. And I don't think it's changed that much in the last 50 years. So that's my take on why there's more of a presence of an instrumental focus. And the kicker and the game changer is once teachers realize the strength and power of having strong student-teacher relationships in any school, then your life is going to be much easier. As long as you, again, like I said, put more latitude in your attitude in terms of working with kids from high impact, high poverty, but high potential situations. So that's my take on it. Now, I could be totally wrong, but based upon my experiences, that's what I think is going on here. So your question is good. And maybe that's a partial answer. There may be other factors, but that's what I think. Based on that, and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. But that's where we are. Okay. All right. Any comments on that? Okay. Let's go to something that made you ponder, think about, appreciate, or even dispute. Michael.
I actually wanted to continue the discussion a little bit further about it, if that's okay. Because I'm just looking at the article, and it said different teacher training programs.
Right.
because when you just said that, I'm just curious. I should maybe just look at the study itself and see what the parameters of it are. Because what you just said makes sense, but I don't think that's what the article said. Because what I heard you say was that it would make sense to you that teachers in their first year would end up in these schools, and because of a lack of confidence or lack of experience, they end up having this direct approach that's more authoritarian. And by the time they get experience to be confident enough to use the reciprocal model, they have the resume to move on to a school that maybe offers that is more sustainable for them to have a longer career. But I'm not sure that that's what the article actually said about the data.
No, I didn't say it did. That was my take on it. You know, in terms of what I've observed in my own experiences, that when new teachers directly out of a teacher training program go where the jobs are, which are your more lower socioeconomic status, high impact, high poverty, but high potential schools, then there's more of a knee-jerk reaction to get the content across, and that becomes the primary focus, which is okay. What I'm saying, though, is that there may be some resistance to building the relational side of the encounter in the classroom due to different cultural issues or any kind of differences that may put the new teacher in what they perceive to be a more difficult place, where control becomes the major part of the day. So that's what I think. Again, I can't speak for all teacher training programs. My impression, and I don't know this per se, but my impression is based upon what my students have told me, is that there's a lot more emphasis on building the relational side of student-teacher encounters than not. Now, I could be wrong because I don't go into all of the classes, but based upon what my students have told me, that's my impression. And if I'm wrong, I mean, you can let me know. I don't know. That's just my take on what my credentialed students have mentioned in the past. That being said, we can't discount the importance, and I think the article bears this out, the importance of the asset that you build in having strong student relationships. And this, by the way, is one of the hardest parts of the job, because as Rita Pearson said, it's the relationships, right? But she also said, you may not like every student that you have, but they can never know it. And you won't. So that's really one of the toughest parts of the job we have. So I'm going to talk more about that as we get into the evening and into next week. Okay. Michael, did that kind of answer your question at all?
No.
No, okay.
Although I appreciate you elaborating on what you said, but I think the answer to my question lies in the study itself.
Yeah,
okay. It's just such a fascinating point.
Yeah.
I'll, if I have a moment, I'll dig a little deeper when I have.
Okay. All right. Let's hear another idea from that second to last box. Michael, you want to reach out and pick somebody?
Well, since I'm being honest today, Leah, would you like to speak?
Leah has a hand up.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
I'll just share my other one. I put that I found the language near the end of the selection about improving the relationship between teacher and student interesting. I appreciated the article's perspective that there is an opportunity to improve a relationship, because I have read several articles that only focus on the day one methods to build rapport. And I unfortunately walked into a classroom where I did not have the chance to have the day one experience, and things started off challenging. So I like that in this article they spoke about, that there's not an end to it. You can still build rapport, and you can change things around.
Yeah, good. And some of these tactics or strategies are very nuanced. I'll give you one example. When class first starts out, the first day of school, and you're the teacher. Now, I don't know if any of you have been in this situation, but your class comes in and sits down. What's the first thing that you do?
Get to know them.
Hopefully. But usually what happens is that you take roll. And how do you take roll?
Go to the website. We use Aries, to be honest. Like it already pops in all the roster, and we just check who's here and who's not here.
Yeah, but how do you check? How do you check?
Call their names.
Yeah, you call the names, right?
Or their names, yeah.
Okay. Now, let's roll tape back. And you probably didn't catch this when you walked into my class or our class, but I didn't call a single name, did I? What did I do?
You were at the door.
I was at the door. That was because we had masks. If we weren't wearing masks, I wouldn't have been at the door. But I checked each one of you in individually. What I did is I went up to you and I asked you for your name. Right? Yeah. That little nuance there can be hugely significant because you have a nanosecond to fire off that student's neocortex and determine how they're going to perceive you. Right? So you have to take advantage of every single second that you're with those kids. And even something as nuanced and as simple as that can make a huge difference. So walk over to a student, smile at them, ask them for their name, check them off, and then go to the next one. It's a totally different atmosphere for the class. And like I said, it's very subtle, very nuanced, but these little things make a difference when you have the opportunity. Now, if you're in Zoom, obviously forget it. Not going to happen. But in a in-person classroom, it can be fairly significant. Elizabeth.
Honestly, I was impressed because you remembered the second session. You remembered everybody's name, and we are a small group. And when you have 36, 37 students and they're coming in the second day, sometimes you get mixed up with the names, and students don't like it,
Yeah, I didn't get it perfect, but I came pretty close. So that's one way, and I think that there's something to be said for that. Okay. Any implications for our teaching? Okay, Mike?
So I'm just going to paraphrase what I wrote, but being able to develop relationship with students is a great way to sometimes not only motivate them in class, but also catch kids that could be on the edge, kids that are at risk, and give them a place where they can be safe and they can enjoy, and sometimes make your class the one reason that they go to school and that they continue on. So I'm not going to go into it. I wrote it in my quick write, but I have a story about a student that I work with now. He's a senior in high school that I've known since middle school, and the kid got in a lot of trouble. And he's now when he was younger, and he's now currently getting ready to apply for to be a music teacher and apply to different colleges and audition. So he's become like a really great kid who volunteers and helps out with a lot of the younger students. But he was in a lot of trouble his first couple years. And it was just relationships that got him on the right path.
Yeah, well, I have a similar story. I have a student who was my very first referral in 1983 when I was the dean of discipline. Right now, he's an assistant principal at a junior high school, and he's in the doctoral program at CSUN. And he was that same kind of kid, trouble all the time. So, the payoff is out there. We just sometimes never see it. Okay. All right, so go ahead and drop your quick writes into your folder when you get a chance. And we're going to move on and share some more ideas. Following up on Mike's comment, I just wanted to say, I saw a poster, I think I have it in my presentation, It says, be the teacher who notices the kids that don't get noticed. And I think that's an important idea that Mike was just talking about too. Okay, another thing I wanted to share with you kind of spins off of the last article, the last IQ, but if we want to check to see if students are understanding the material, then there's a little device that I like to use. And I'm going to give you a little background on it. There was a teacher in my school when I was a dean, and he was talking to his class, and they were going to be reviewing for a test that he was going to give the next day. And he said, okay, class, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you some questions to prepare you for the test, but I don't want you to answer the question. I just want you to show me if you think you know the answer to the question. So if you think you know the answer to the question, oh, and by the way, my principal is going to be coming in today to observe us. He's not looking at you, he's looking at me, so just don't pretend he's not even here. Anyway, getting back to those questions now. When I ask you the question, if you think you know the answer, raise your right hand. If you think you don't know the answer, raise your left hand. So the principal came in and he asked the class, who can tell me the definition of a nucleus? And the kids that didn't know raised their left hand, the kids that knew raised their right hand, and every kid had a hand up. And of course the principal's thinking, wow, this is great, everybody knows the answer, because they don't know what's going on. So there's a little strategy for you during your evaluation. But what I thought of was another idea, and that is that if I make up cards, and on one side I have a green exclamation point, and on the other side I have a red question mark, and I do the same thing, and I ask the class, how many of you think you know the answer to question X? If you think you know the answer, hold up the green exclamation point. If you think you don't know the answer, hold up the red question mark. And I can get a visual display of who feels comfortable in whether or not they know the information. So if I see a lot of red, I know that I need to back up and do a little bit target teaching and review. Whereas if I see mostly green, then I know that I can move on. And again, everybody gets a card, and it's very simple to do. It doesn't cost more than some 3x5 cards and a red and green marker. Okay? Anyway, just an interesting idea to share. So we're looking at the model of the domains of interaction, and there are 4 parts to it, but it's all interactive. It's not like one thing stands out. So again, we talk about the notion of fluency, kids being able to read with enough speed and accuracy and intonation to reflect the author's writing, but also with enough speed to maintain the ability to make it comprehensible. Schema we've talked about, those are those spider webs that we try to build and add on to. The cognitive strategies are those steps that we put readers into, especially struggling readers, so that they can learn how to behave independently when it comes to reading. And one that comes up a lot of times in secondary is the issue of motivation. So this is where we're going to start as we begin to unpack this domains of interaction. So in the domains of interaction, motivation is always the constant challenge, is it not? I mean, every time I bring this up, it's usually a hot topic, and it raises some questions and some challenges. Now, this is nothing new. Kids have been acting up for many, many years, as you can see by the cartoon, right? So it's not like teenagers are a new phenomenon or a new situation. We also know that in some situations, class size could be a factor because, again, our kids are packed into our rooms, and sometimes that in itself is a challenge. So we looked at a chapter from the article, The Motivated Brain, and the idea was to give us some background information on this idea of motivation before we really dive into it and talk about how we try to engage kids in environments in the classroom that are going to provide for opportunities for more intrinsic motivation. Again, it's more than just putting motivational posters in the decor. It's really much more about how we engage kids in social interaction. And that's a big part of it too. So we're going to go ahead and start with our IQ karaoke to build some background. And I'll take, oops, come back here. I'll take the first 5 to sign up in the chat. So I'll give you a minute to do that. And get a hold of your IQ and the article on page 98. Okay, we can have 1 or 2 more. Anybody care to jump in? Okay, so if you would open up your readers to page 98, and if you, when you share your IQ, give us a chance to find the quote and give us the page number that it's on, and we'll try to find it and follow along as you share the quote and then your rationale. Okay, all right, Marisol, I see you're back in the house, so let's go ahead and give us your rendition. The mic is yours.
I just walked in like 3 minutes ago, but my
do you need to wait?
No, I'm good. I'm ready.
Okay.
My quote is on page 104, and it's in that top paragraph.
Okay.
The quote is, "Rewards turn what should be satisfying tasks into drudgery. Often lower quality work is the outcome." Cohn cites 70 studies showing that the incentives/rewards, such as A's and pizza parties, are not effective and can be counterproductive in the long term in regard to instilling a desire to learn and a strong work ethic in students. And then I used ellipses to forward to the part that says, more effective is corrective and supportive timely feedback and the encouragement for effort. I chose this quote because I personally feel like this is a strategy that a lot of instructors still use. Like growing up, I thoroughly remember multiple teachers of mine sort of incentivizing us with rewards like pizza parties. And I still know of so many people that still do that. But what I think is interesting about that strategy is a lot of instructors use it almost as a threat to control behavioral issues in their class. Like, if you guys don't start behaving correctly or like stop misbehaving, I'm going to take away your pizza party. And so it turns into one of those things that's more used as a threat and a method of managing a class because you're lacking the classroom management and community in your class where students are already performing well and just, being deserving of that in general. So it turns into one of those things where the students are only acting accordingly because they want this pizza party. Whereas if you don't normalize things like that and you just give them positive feedback when they have earned it and encourage them, it really creates a different dynamic in the classroom. And so I think it's interesting that so many teachers still use those methods when they aren't beneficial in the way that they would like us to believe. So
yeah, and we're going to get into a further discussion about that too in a little bit. But Alfie Kohn is an interesting guy. He wrote a book called Punished by Rewards, and he's done a lot of work with Carol Dweck in the issue of growth mindset. And what he gets into is the idea that the question is, how do we move kids away from external motivators to become more intrinsically motivated? And the idea of grades and rewards, as you say, are more of an external motivator that may not attract or be attractive to all that many kids. And we're going to talk more about the whole issue in a little bit. So I'm glad you raised that quote. It's a good preview for where we're going to go. Okay, thank you. Okay, now we have Michelle.
Hello.
Hello.
Almost like clicked the wrong button. All right, so I chose the page 100. We must be careful to not come at grit from a fear-based focus on testing, college selection, especially with young adolescent brains that are more susceptible to negative or critical conditions. And so when I was in elementary school, I was like really stressed over the test, like a lot. To be honest, everybody was. And the problem was about it is that like we didn't get like any like deep breaths, nothing. We just straight get onto it, and I think that's actually bad because the more nervous the children are, the more careless they will be. And however, I was actually like and I was even like studying too hard, yes. But however, later on, I see like there are more better methods that makes the students calm down, like having like a sugary sweet or something because it runs in your brain. Like, yeah, I'm not sure if everybody remembers the STAR test. Do you guys remember the STAR test that you took? And then they gave you like those like food back in elementary school. Yes, exactly. So another one is that in CSUN, I remember that everybody was stressed about this one math test because it was the most difficult, and it was actually, in fact, there were too many questions in 1 hour, and as a result, nobody passed. The average was literally like a 30%, and so the professor realized something was wrong, so he swore to never do it again, and he never did. And it made everybody more like relaxed, and he did curve it in the end, luckily. So the thing is, you can't make those kinds of things because that will make people panic, and thus it will lead to disaster.
Yeah, so the whole idea on the Yerke scale is about trying to just figure out enough tension to get people into the task, but not so much to frustrate them. And there are things we can do with respect to easing test anxiety that imply that the more we prepare students with rehearsal strategies, with practice activities to get them in a comfort zone, then the better off we'll be. And we'll share some strategies on how to do that later on as well. Okay? But certainly, anytime we can reduce anxiety for students, then the better performance they're going to have. Okay? All right. Thank you. Daniel, you're up.
All right, Professor Coop. So I picked a quote that's on page 106. And essentially it says, what is responsible for lack of motivation? Educators across the country teaching all socioeconomic groups are asking, why aren't these kids motivated? As indicated by the theories just discussed, many factors can contribute to students' lack of motivation. Other possible reasons include the infusion of technology into students' lives, the expectation of immediate gratification, chronic stress, and living in impoverished conditions. These issues may not be in our locus of control. And so my explanation, pretty much I said, I enjoyed reading this section of the chapter, and I couldn't agree more with the reasoning found behind why students are not motivated. I have seen students who come from different home backgrounds who are going through very severe things in their personal lives, such as parental problems, living in impoverished conditions, and having or being surrounded by gang influences. Mm-hmm. If these students are facing hardships such as these, then these students are forced to grow up quickly, and unfortunately cannot be just kids. These students oftentimes don't have the energy or peace of mind to just focus on school because they have too much going on at home. This ultimately leads to the inability to focus on their education, which can come across as lack of motivation to teachers. I also agree that our generation of students are in tune with the concept of immediate gratification. Students want teachers to... Sorry, do you want to stop her?
Okay.
Okay. Where did I leave off? Students want to be rewarded quickly, sometimes without even trying, which is unfair to the students who do put in hard work and effort. I also agree that technology has a huge influence on students and their ways of thinking. Some students want nothing more than to be on their phones and social media. However, I believe that social media can have a negative effect on students because they're influenced highly by what they see and therefore create an inaccurate depiction of what they need to be. Social media can lead students to become concerned about the wrong things when ultimately students should be focusing on their education as much as possible.
Okay, so you got a lot of things going on in there, that quote that we can think about. First of all, we know that technology and social media has a huge distractibility for students and phones and all that. We've certainly talked about that in the past. The other thing I want to mention is that when you have kids who are from the environments that you described, this makes it more imperative on us in terms of having established strong relationships with the students. And also it causes us to think about the stability of the environment that we have in our classrooms where kids can feel at ease and leave the situations from those external factors you described behind. And so when we think about our classrooms as a place for respite, then I think causes us to rethink how the typical kinds of classrooms that we've experienced ourselves. And remember, as I said on the first night, you've all had a minimum of 12 years of student teaching, right? So your model of education is basically what you were coming up with. And somehow we need to make a little bit of a shift. And the articles talk about shift in terms of instruction, relationships, and also taking into account the differences between our novice students and our expert students, and how we need to really think about not frustrating kids to the point that they give up, which means that we have to really be careful and thoughtful in terms of our instructional planning and assessing where students have gaps and where we can move ahead. So you think this is an easy job? No, there's a lot to it, not just in what we've talked about right now. So those are some things for consideration. We're going to try to address some of those as we go through the course. So thank you, Daniel. Michael, the mic is yours.
I chose a quote from page 103. It reads as follows. If we achieve these, and by these they were referencing competency and mastery of skills, connections and relatedness, and a sense of belonging, autonomy, or a sense of control over their goals and behaviors, we become self-determined and are intrinsically motivated to pursue what is meaningful to us. Motivational crowding out is the term used to describe how external rewards may crowd out intrinsic rewards of a job well done and enjoyed. Thus, the common classroom practice of rewarding students with stickers, privileges, and so forth can backfire when it comes to long-term motivation. And I went off on our rant, so I'll paraphrase what I wrote, but I think this might be a generational thing, but being kind of squarely Gen X, where the programming and the conditioning growing up was very much like school is a pathway to career success and money. And then you enter into your 40s and you feel really hollow around that because it is not the intrinsic reward. This makes a lot of sense that, oh no, regardless of what the skill is, regardless of what the path was, those three things really are what brings a sense of contentment into life. But as a teacher, I don't know how to, even my adult students, I don't know how to instill that in them. Like I know it, because for myself, the journey to that realization was very recent. It was, 20, 30 years beyond what a youth student would be.
So tell me again, because part of your transmission kind of broke up a little bit. In terms of your realization, can you just capture it in a few words?
Sure. I mean, I midlife really hard as far as like understanding that the things that I was pursuing, even if I were to realize them fully, success, financial reward, wouldn't bring any real sense of satisfaction beyond, financial success. Obviously would bring a comfort, a feeling of safety and security, but beyond that, it wouldn't provide a meaning or substance or intrinsic sense of satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, unless you're really in love with teaching, then you're going to be intrinsically motivated that whole idea about growth mindset comes into play again there. So, and motivation is such an interesting thing. It's largely a misunderstood idea, I think, and we're going to try to explore some of that a little further. I have room for one more person if anybody would like to do a karaoke. Anybody interested?
I can go.
Okay.
I said on page 107, lack of relevance to the real world. Many students believe that. Did you want me to read the whole paragraph?
Either that or you can paraphrase it.
Okay. What I said about it was the paragraph talks about that how it's important that we connect the students to the real world. Especially, I said that I'm a math teacher, and every year I have this question from my students, especially when going to functions. Why would need that? I had even a student ask me, I'm not going to go to a shoe store and ask them x plus 1 is equal to whatever, so I had to come up with ideas and research papers on what careers need math and why math is important, and so that they can be motivated to learn, or else they would like just get out of it because they don't want to learn something that it's not connected to real life and their future and what holds for them. So this idea was really important for me, like that the subject, why would they need to know the subject is important? Like what careers, like the soccer player, why does he need, if he's going to be a soccer player, why do I need math? Well, you need to know direction. You need to know how fast you're going to go. Those are all related. There's mathematical, even if you're not really solving it like with hand and paper, they need to understand that their brain, because they're learning math, it starts like automatically, it solves it for them, So they had to understand those concepts. So it is important that we motivate our students through like hands-on activities in class, research papers, and other materials. Instead of telling them why is it important, they have also to come up with their own ideas on why is it important so that they can relate.
Yeah. For an example, soccer is about geometry, right? You got to look at the angles of the kick and all that. So there's lots of different ways we can make connections. I was, when it comes to math, my suggestion was to have a brainstorming session on how many times you use math in your daily life and start exploring some of those. And they were able to come up with some interesting things that we can spin off of as we go through. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. All right, go ahead and drop at the end of class, make sure you drop your IQs into your Google folders. Do me a favor, though, and make sure two things. One is that on your IQ and on your QuickWrite that you have the titles and the numbers and that they're accurate. Then also on your folders, if you look at your folders, I've had to reformat a lot of your folders because you're not quite getting the labels right. And if I get a paper that's late and it's unlabeled, I don't know what I'm reading. So you have to make sure that you have those and check those. I've redone the folders that needed to be redone. So when you go into your folder, look at what I've got there and you'll see the format for the titles. Okay. Now, this is a book that it's a book about language, and we talk about relationships and how important it is to choose our words. And again, it's about language habits and patterns that we use all day, every day, and work with our students. And there's some nice verbal language in there that you can explore and internalize to think about the ways in which we interact with our students. So I'll just throw that up there for you as another reference for your professional libraries. All right, so the model that I'm going to introduce you to is the model I call cooperative literacy. And there are several aspects to it, which I'll share with you. One is we want to develop a connection to the mindset regarding adolescent literacy, and we're going to add numeracy to the mix as well because we have to be fair. We also want to develop an understanding of how to implement a discrete classroom organizational structure to support adolescent literacy along with psychosocial development. And we also want to generate thinking about how to organize and facilitate instruction to heighten student efficacy. So these are the main goals of the cooperative literacy approach. Now, when I talk about this with teachers, oftentimes, these are areas that kind of hit them where they live, and sometimes there tends to be a little resistance. So what I say is this is not a free throw, because people can sometimes get defensive on the approaches that I'm going to share with you, and they may tend to try to block my shot. So I'm going to ask you to suspend your disbelief for a moment as we dive into some of these ideas. What I'm going to share with you is a chapter from one of the books that I've written called Organizing a Classroom for Democratic Engagement. And it's not social studies centric, although the book was written for social studies, but this is just a part of the overall book. So the big ideas of cooperative literacy include the following. One is that many secondary students do not come to school for the curriculum. Now, I know when I say that, people have a knee-jerk reaction, like, huh? What do you mean they're not coming for my curriculum? But the fact of the matter is, why do kids come to school for the most part?
To socialize.
Right, because that's where their friends are, right? Teenagers are social beings. So, I mean, some people will say, well, because they have to, but, you know, honestly, if they really don't want to, then they won't come. So that's one idea. The second idea is if you're a secondary teacher in today's schools, you're in what I call a default position of having to help raise kids. Because again, a lot of the prerequisites that we expect our kids to have, again, due to a lot of external factors, maybe some other factors, we find that even such things as common courtesy need to be instilled into our students. When you think about it, over the past 30, 40 years, kids have taken more of a role of an institutional caregiver. Not only do we teach them the reading, writing, arithmetic, and focusing on relationships, we teach implicitly sometimes things like manners. We deal with health issues. If kids can't see, we get them glasses. If they can't hear, then we get them set up with remediation there. We even make sure that they can stand up straight through scoliosis screening that's done in PE classes with the nurses. So there's a lot of factors that come into our profession. Even if kids need clothes or need food, then usually schools are the ones that make that happen. So as schools take on more of a role of institutional caregiver, there are other aspects to the job of teaching that have made it a much different profession than it was even 50 or 60 years ago. And of course, it's the parent's job too, but we oftentimes know that parents may, for one reason or another, actually be contributing to the problem. As the caption here says, well, your mother and I are feeling overwhelmed, so you'll have to bring yourselves up. It's probably not too far from the truth in some cases. And then the third idea is that one of the common denominators across disciplines is the demand and command of literacy. And again, I throw numeracy in there as well, although I put numeracy under the umbrella of literacy. So again, the reality of today's schools often demands that classroom teachers address these severe issues, even though the task is not always considered a part of the regular job. And I think this is probably one of our biggest challenges. I would say that the content of what we teach is probably not the biggest challenge, but the other factors that orbit around that are certainly what contribute to issues of discontent. Now, when it comes to social emotional learning, this chart's a little bit hazy to read, but in the chart it says that 78% of teachers reflected that it's their job to help students develop strong social and emotional skills. But when it comes to actually knowing how to do it, they say that it's more difficult than that, and that they don't have a lot of understanding of how to actually get involved in it. What they said, it's difficult finding ways to help students who appear to be experiencing emotional or psychological distress, and 23% of teachers said it was their most challenging task. And I think you can relate to this. Some research has linked focusing on these social emotional competencies to higher academic performance and better outcomes outside of school. But while most teachers say it's important for us to teach these skills, many still don't feel equipped to help students manage their emotions. And again, this is the challenging part of the job. You're working with teenagers, you know, that executive function is still forming. And even in adults, sometimes executive functions are still forming. That prefrontal cortex is continuing to get rewired. And so lack of impulse and all these other issues come into play, which causes us to have knee-jerk reactions sometimes that we regret later on. How many of you have heard this sage advice before? Remember, don't smile through Christmas. We can loosen up later, but it's hard to regain control once you've lost it. That's kind of a mantra in a lot of different ways in terms of new teacher training. I always parody that with the kids saying, don't smile through Christmas. We can loosen up later, but it's hard to regain control once we've lost it. It's sort of like that two-way street that even the kids are saying the same thing we are. We know that students with high emotional intelligence also may be better at managing their social world, from navigating peer pressure to forming positive relationships with teachers, which puts them in a better position to focus on learning. When we talk about social emotional learning, we're not talking about SEL happening at one time of the day. It's something that has to be taught and embedded throughout the entire day in order for students to really have the opportunity to develop these skills and apply these skills in everyday life. So on page 42 of your reader, there's a checklist which calls out some of the skill sets that come from spending some time on social emotional learning. And again, these include the notion of one's self-awareness, the ability to really understand where our emotions are coming from and how it influences our behavior, how we learn self-management to regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations, how we are socially aware in terms of our ability to empathize with others, particularly from diverse backgrounds and cultures, to understand social and ethical norms for behavior. In other words, what is situationally appropriate in time and place, aligning thoughts and feelings with the situation. Our relationship skills, the ability to establish, maintain healthy, rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups, involving communicating clearly, listening actively, cooperating, and again, resisting inappropriate social pressure, but more importantly, negotiating conflict constructively and seeking and offering help when needed. And then, of course, responsible decision-making is the ability to make constructive choices and really understand the ethics of the choices that we make versus being able to just respond impulsively. So let's dig a little deeper into some of the ideas around social emotional learning. Can you hear this okay? You're not hearing it? All right, let me come out of this a second. Let me jump back in here a second. You should hear it now.
There's a lot of talk these days about SEL, social emotional learning. But what exactly is it? Social emotional learning is the process of learning social and emotional skills. And it's just as important as learning reading or math. This learning process is most effective when it begins early and continues through high school. Social emotional skills are essential for success in school, work, and life. With SEL, students learn to manage their own emotions and behaviors, have empathy and show care and concern for others, solve problems effectively, make responsible decisions, and maintain healthy relationships. Students learn to recognize what's happening inside them and to be aware of their emotions, which helps them deal with strong emotions and impulsive behaviors. It helps them stop, take a breath, and think about a situation before acting. Students learn to identify others' emotions and perspectives, which helps them empathize and show compassion, no matter who they are or what their background is. It's not difficult to imagine how this is important in the classroom and in life. Students learn to solve problems in peaceful ways and communicate assertively about what they need or want. This helps them get along with other students and get the help they need from adults. When students learn to make responsible decisions about their lives and their future, things can turn out better. Research shows social emotional learning makes a difference. Students who participate in SEL do better academically, have improved attitudes and behaviors, and act in delinquent or disruptive ways less often. In the United States, students with strong social emotional competence are twice as likely to earn a college degree and nearly 50% more likely to graduate from high school and have a full-time job by age 25. Just as important, students who are socially and emotionally competent have more friends. This means they're more likely to feel connected to school and do well, and less likely to be left out or bullied. Simply put, by participating in social emotional learning, students learn the skills to succeed in every facet of school and the rest of their lives.
Okay. So that's a little bit of a preview in terms of what we want to address, and I'm going to be sharing some ideas with you regarding infusing SEL into life in the classroom. What this quote says that experts in social emotional learning and child development say that secondary school years are a crucial time to focus on teaching skills such as responsible decision-making, emotional management, and nurturing relationships. But the older students get, the less schools have traditionally emphasized social emotional learning. And I think there's some truth in that because we're so busy dealing with standards and all these other factors that weigh in. So the question is, how can we embed components of social emotional learning into our everyday classroom settings? That's what I want to focus on. So if you turn to page 60 in your reader, you'll see an article called Using Literacy Embeds to Teach Appropriate Behavior. And I just want to reference the article. I'm going to share with you where we go with this in the next few minutes, but I just want you to earmark the article so you know where it is. Okay? All right. I'm going to need 4 volunteers to do a portion of a reading of a story. So could I get 4 volunteers to either sign up? Let's have you sign up in the chat. I just need 4. It's just a short couple paragraphs, but I need you to read it out loud. Okay, so Mike. Mike and Marisol. 2 more? Okay. Mike, another Mike. And let's see, 1 more. Okay, Elizabeth, thank you. Okay, what I'll share with you is something called School Days. In School Days, what you have here is something that you've seen before. It's the Anticipation Guide. And this is a program that I wrote. Well, I worked with teachers on developing for not only advisory and homeroom time, but also as a way of being prescriptive in terms of addressing problems that arise in the classroom. So let's just start with this one, and then we'll go into the nuts and bolts of it. So in the Anticipation Guide, again, we ask them to put a check mark next to the statements that they agree, and if they disagree, leave it blank. Okay, so you can kind of get an idea where this is going just by the statements. Number 1 says it's okay to make fun of someone as long as everyone is laughing. Agree or disagree? Number 2, people who witness others being picked on are responsible to stop it, which gets into the idea of, is there a good Samaritan issue around these ideas, or is there too much fear? And number 3, some people don't mind being picked on because it gets them attention. And then number 4, teasing people is just a part of the normal school conversation. And then we have kids, like we usually do, we have them write their responses on the blanks that accompany the sheet, and then we have a discussion about these factors. And again, if you think about where kids live, this is a very present school kind of situation, right? Kids getting picked on, being made fun of, blah, blah, blah. Those kinds of issues that every kid, I'm sure, has experienced at some point. And then we move it into a vignette. So this is where I'm going to need my volunteers. So I'm going to start with the first part. This is a story about Jeffrey, and I'm going to start with Mike Freed. Would you give us this paragraph for him, please?
Sure. Jeffrey is a quiet teenager who has missed a lot of school due to a severe illness. He's a bit behind the others in reading, and he has trouble pronouncing some words because of his medication. Mary and Alfredo like to tease him, and they think he actually enjoys it. He ignores them most of the time, but he has been known to tell them when enough is enough. Miss Johnson, their English teacher, has tried to explain in a vague way why Jeffrey has been absent from class so often. That was her effort to get the students to leave him alone. What Megan, can't understand is why the other kids in the class are so mean to him.
Okay, and just as a notice, the title is Megan in the Metal, not the Middle. So there's going to be some meddling things going on here as well. Okay? All right, our next one is Marisol.
My name is Megan, and I'm in middle school. I have class with this guy, Jeffrey. He is kind of geeky, but he is nice. All of our teachers have told us that he is sick and will be missing a lot of school. I feel sorry for him, and when the teacher told us about him, I kind of teared up. But the others around me blew it off. So, is he stupid anyway? Who cares? I do, and it's messed up that he is sick, I replied.
Okay, thank you. And Mike Colucci.
When Jeffrey started to attend class all the time, I guess he was okay, but Alfredo and his friends in class started bugging him all the time. Miss Johnson was oblivious, even though I told her that it was happening. I think she just didn't want to see it happen. Mary would whisper his name, Jeffrey, and then laugh when he turned around. That's mean, I shouted. Shut up, Megan, mind your own business and keep out of ours. Megan likes you, Jeffrey, they would say when I stuck up for him.
Okay, thank you. And Elizabeth, you're going to bring it home.
My friends would tell me to leave it alone because I was making Alfredo and the others mad because I was sticking up for that weirdo. They said that I might be making things worse for Jeffrey because the taunting was becoming more serious. One day I got so mad that I said something loud enough for Miss Johnson to hear me. I had to tell her that the others were being mean to Jeffrey. Then they got in trouble because Miss Johnson was on their behavior, but she did little to stop it. I figured that nothing was going to change until I did something myself to correct the situation.
Okay, so here thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, all my readers. So here we have an open-ended situation, and we want to pursue this a little further through some discussion questions. Okay, so the questions include these four. And what we do is we have the kids write their responses, and then we continue or extend the discussion based upon their responses. And these are questions that you're not going to find an answer to specifically in the article. They operate slightly meta to the article, but this is where we engage kids in what we call making inferences and predictions. So number one says, how do you think Jeffrey feels about the way Alfredo and Mary treat him at school? So there's no literal answer to that question. They have to develop their own thinking and their own empathetic thinking about it. Number two, why do you suppose that Alfredo and Mary are so intent on teasing Jeffrey? And here again, we have to dive into what their thinking is about, and in order to figure out what's going on there. Number three says, describe what you think the other student's responsibility is in this case. So are witnesses and spectators, do they have a stake in changing this? And then number four, what would you suggest that Megan do in this situation with Jeffrey? In other words, what next steps would you recommend that she take? So these are ways of getting into issues around social and emotional learning, empathy, ethics, students' choices. And in working with teachers, my goal was to somehow merge social emotional learning with literacy under the guise of discipline and classroom management. So I started working on a lot of these different scenarios. Many of these were based on working with teachers, and during my decade of deandom, I started remembering and making notes of all the different issues and challenges that face teachers So the idea was that we could train teachers in the process and do a diagnostic prescriptive approach at handling issues around classroom management and discipline. Well, wrong's gone wrong isn't exactly the case, but actually we think not, because what happened was that we started developing all these different scenarios and all these different series. And it was finally published in a book called Teach Students to Manage Their Behaviors, the School Days Program. I want to show you the book first of all. So when we talked about the response sheet, there's a place for the students to respond to the anticipation guide, and then a place for them to write their responses to the questions. So when we are in person, we would duplicate a bunch of these and make them two-sided. And then depending upon how often I wanted to use it, then I would do maybe one lesson a week or maybe twice a week. Or if I had a homeroom advisory, this would be where I could build in my social emotional learning component. The way it looks in the book is that you have an anticipation guide to begin. And then the second part of it is the story with an illustration. And then the third part are the questions that we have the students respond to. So that's what it looks like in terms of the book itself. These are, I don't know if you can see this well enough, but these are the issues that the 70 different vignettes deal with. Anything from accusations and advocacy to anger to profanity, discrimination, exclusion, inclusion, stealing, skipping school, all these different kinds of things that you would expect would be the gist of the crucible of the secondary, middle, or high school. Okay. Now, what teachers said when they used these are these comments here. I did 4 of the school days activities and all were successful with my class. The directions were easy to follow and students were able to complete the agree-disagree statements section easily. We had a class discussion after completing this first section. It was enlightening to hear their different opinions. I know that the questions were written for older students, but my students had a lively discussion with each section. So this was, I think, a 6th grade class. They were quite enthusiastic discussing the different statements. I have a talkative bunch to begin with, but all my students cannot wait to share their different opinions and similar experiences they had relative to the core trait scenario being discussed. We call the focus areas core traits in the program. Discussion was helpful not only for this particular activity, gave students great practice on how to have a respectful and academic discussion about personal opinions. So there's another payoff there that we didn't expect. So when we talk about the winner of It's Not My Job award, whose job is it to work with SEL? This is another case of the It's Not My Job award where the guy painting the lines on the street didn't remove the dead animal and just painted right over it. So here's the deal with school days. I will be emailing you all a copy of the book. You're going to get it in the email with a quick write tonight. My suggestion, the reason that I'm emailing it and not using it in Canvas, because I don't know the limitations of how long you can actually access Canvas, but if I email it to you, you can drag it over and download it on your desktop and you'll have it for in perpetuity, because I know some of you are not even in the classroom yet, and some of you are student teachers, so you're not even really on your own, unless your mentor teacher will let you try it. But when you get it, take a look at it. Download it, look through it. There are 70 different vignettes with anticipation guides, vignettes, and discussion questions. And then if you find that you can't use it, then just go ahead and put it in your trash. But if you're interested in buying a hard copy, I can put you in touch with how to get it. It's probably around $14 or $15, but you have it, a digital copy. It's as good as having it in paper, unless you like perhaps having it in paper. But that'll be sent in your email tonight. Okay, so again, look it over, and I invite you to go ahead and make use of it as needed. And again, if you can't find it useful, then just go ahead and dispose of it. Okay, any questions? Okay. So the other thing we have to think about for our kids is that this may be the last place where students who have extreme or even non-extreme challenges can get their needs addressed. Because once they're out of school, the limitation of services kicks up quite a bit. So we have to get them where we can, I guess is the name of that tune. And again, we know that we have a lot of kids who, for whatever reason, just don't enjoy school, don't want to go to school, have to be coerced to go to school, and so that's one of our challenges as well. So we know that the process of change and these shifts that we talked about in the last Quick Write come about, and sometimes change is tough. I mean, it's hard to think about. Again, you have that 12 years of student teaching in your head, and now we're talking about shifting different ways and making changes. Some people, when change comes along, they'll just kind of look this way and look that way and hope that it just passes them by. Other people, when change comes along, they just figure, you know what, I'm going to try to outrun it, and no way, no how. But if we take time, and other people will just simply blow it off and say, you know what, that's not for me. I'm just going to stick to my old practices. But if we take time to really study and learn more about some of the issues that our students face, some of the methodologies, and some of the things we can introduce to our students, then we can really enhance the whole practice and even basically change with the times as needed. So these are some ideas that we're going to present to you in terms of classroom. Of course, we want everybody to evolve along the way here, right? And that's one of our biggest things that we like in terms of this teaching profession. And of course, some people are just understandably afraid of change in any way, shape, or form. And of course, Common Core was one of those changes that we talked about last week in terms of the shifts toward an influence of more informational reading and writing and more evidence-based inquiry. That's kind of a new way of doing business relative to what was in the past. We know that it's not the strongest of the species that survives nor the most intelligent, but the one that is most responsive to change. And I think, again, as teachers, we always are responding to some of the changing challenges. I think COVID would be another example of that in terms of how we respond to that whole issue. So again, our ability to adapt is going to be the key to our success. Now, one of the writers that was discussed in the IQ this week was William Glasser. William Glasser had written a book called Choice Theory. And what he did, he's a psychiatrist, and he did a lot of work in schools. And what he came up with was this idea of something called control theory. And he wrote a book called Control Theory in the Classroom. It's probably, for me, one of those books that changed my whole career in teaching. And again, his idea of control theory, which is basically an engineering concept, has to do with, and it's about a feedback loop. He applied that to human behavior. And again, this book is probably one of those books that changed my whole educational life back in the early 80s. And I was fortunate enough to do some work with him. And so I've been determining that this had a lot of influence in terms of my own teaching and my own classroom organization ever since I had this experience. Now, the book was written in 1986. Choice Theory was a new book that he wrote in response to the fact that when it came to control theory, people had a problem with the word control, because what he talks about with control theory is about the choices we make in our behavior, because he says that all behavior is chosen. If you remember that in the article, it discussed that. So he wrote a book called Choice Theory, and he included more than just classroom scenarios. He's a psychiatrist, and he was best known for his work in reality therapy, but choice theory is more extensive than control theory in the classroom. Control theory in the classroom used to be required reading for my class. It's gone out of print. You can still get hold of it, though, but and I'm going to show you how in just a minute if you're interested. But it's a theory that's proposed by William Glasser about motivation, contending that all behavior is never caused by response to an outside stimulus. Instead, control theory states that behavior is inspired by what a person wants most at any given time. And he describes this in terms of 5 behaviors, if you can remember from the article. The need for survival, for belonging, freedom, fun, and the need for power. Now, in terms of the need for survival, he says it's really not, as extensive a need as it once was. In other words, we're not running from saber-toothed tigers anymore, but we do exercise survival behaviors all the time. If you think about it, we eat to survive. We stop at a red light when we're driving to survive, and all these different kinds of things that we do that are really survival needs that we don't categorize that way because we basically take them for granted. The need for belonging, he says, is something that we're born with. We're gregarious species. We need to mingle with other people and socialize. There are outliers. You do have people who are, psychopaths or sociopaths or antisocial and don't get along with anybody. But for the most part, I'd say 99% of the population, and certainly among teenagers, the need to belong is something that's a driving force in their development. The need for freedom, we need to belong, we need to control our environment and make choices. He says the need for fun is the biological payoff for learning, because when we're learning something, we don't even realize that it translates to fun. And again, it's another one of those human characteristics that we strive for. But he says the need that's uniquely and distinctly human is a need for power. The need to have power over a situation and over other people. And he says this is where we get into a little bit of difficulty in terms of when our power needs are not met, then our behavior is commensurate to that lacking of having that need met. And that's where we run into problems. Now, control theory, because it's not a print, you can actually find it for around a penny on Amazon. It's gone up a little bit, I think, to maybe 45 cents. And if you want to get it, it's about an hour and a half reading amount of time. But that's one book that I recommend everybody because, again, it really explained for me not only the behavior of my students, but my own behavior in relation to my students, and even my behavior in terms of friends and family. So I think it's a valuable book. You can get it for a cent or 45 cents. It'll cost you about $4.75 to ship it, but it's still a good deal. And if you end up buying the book and you don't like it for whatever reason, I'll be happy to buy the copy back from you at the rate that you were able to pay for it. I think now it's gone up a little bit more. Now it's 25 cents, and I think you can, if you look for a new used copy, you can find that. I think I found one the other day for like $1.20. So check it out if you're interested. It's one of those books that I recommend. So when we think about the classroom, I kind of define it this way. I define it as like le puzzle. It's all these different factors that move together to try to coalesce into one thriving organism. So the problems that we face in terms of putting the puzzle together include just managing. We have to manage not only the students, we have to manage data, we have to manage the organization of the room. There's all these different things that are management propositions that you probably never even thought of when you thought of becoming a teacher. We have to organize. Not only are we organizing our instruction and our material, but we're organizing our students as well. Problem solving is something that we do every minute of every day in school, whether it's a problem with students not understanding the material, to a problem with students' behavior, to some other mitigating circumstance that translates to some sort of problem or issue. We have to mediate all these different problems. Sometimes the mediation is a conflict between students. Sometimes it's between a student and ourselves. And we always have to deal with the unexpected. The fire alarm that goes off, the kid that pukes on a computer, all these different things that happen that we can't even be ready for. In the meantime, we have to provide materials for the students. We have to attend to their psychosocial development because they are adolescents, or in middle school we call them transessents, emerging into adolescence. And again, among all this, we have to come up with ways to appropriately instruct all of our students. You still want the job? Just kidding. There's a lot to it, though, isn't there? Again, this may be a classroom of yesterday, but it's not our fathers or mothers or grandfathers' classrooms anymore. Today's classrooms might take on an appearance of something like this. A little bit more challenge involved here in working with our students. So when I think about putting the puzzle together, these are the factors that I think of. One is how we organize and structure the class, because this is really where it all begins. And I'm kind of obsessive about how I set up my classes, as you might have guessed already. And then the methodology in terms of enhancing students' knowledge base of literacy and numeracy. This is probably not one of the best models that we can think of.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Well, at least you knew the Hawley-Smoot tariff, didn't you? Okay. So the other parts of the puzzle include, again, focusing on adolescent development, and then, again, problem solving. So these are the four big parts for me in terms of when I'm thinking about my class. These are the areas that I want to address, okay? Again, there are a lot of hands that go into putting together a classroom. So my ideas may seem contradictory to more traditional approaches. I had the stocks and the racks taken out of my classroom when I started teaching. So, we have to really think through these issues in terms of how to build from the ground up the foundational aspects of our classroom that are going to make it function in a way where it's a dynamic organism. So, if you're ready, we will continue. Motivating students to learn talks about the idea that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I'm sure you've all heard this phrase before, but there's another part of this that you may not have heard, and that is you can put salt in their oats. The way that you control the extant conditions in which that being is will create more conditions for intrinsic motivation. And this is really the goal, and was something that was alluded to in the previous quick write regarding what do teens want. So how do we organize students for more effort-based learning is really the key question. So I'm going to give you a little scenario here, and I'd like you to jot down some ideas that come to mind, and then we'll share some as a group, okay? Here's the scenario. I call it the company store scenario. Congratulations, you just inherited a company that has about 30 to 125 employees. It's known that a few of the employees are reluctant to work there, but most of them show up nevertheless. Your problem, and something which makes this company unique, is that you cannot pay, fire, or give time off to any of the employees. So as their manager, what will you do to keep them motivated and productive so that you'll be able to remain in business? Good luck. I'd like you to see if you can come up with 3 ideas, and then we'll share some in the general session. I'll put this up on screen to let you read it again as needed. Okay, let's see what ideas we might have come up with. Would anybody like to share an idea? Okay, Mike?
Reward system for the most productive employees.
Okay. Mike, pick another person to go.
Let's see. I don't know who's all actually here. How about Marisol?
I don't know how this would work in theory because I wasn't sure if it would be considered paying them. I thought like if the company has stocks, if you reward them by giving them stocks of the company itself, so that the better the company does, the more money they earn in their stocks.
Okay.
I don't.
All right. Good. Thank you. We pick another person.
Let me see. I'm gonna pick someone who hasn't. I don't think we've heard from. Luis.
Luis.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you now.
Something I would do to keep them motivated is to provide feedback and always look at the positive outcomes they produce, and probably use an incentive like a pay raise for a certain amount of work they do.
Okay.
In the company.
Good. You can't pay them though, so the pay raise is going to be out of the question, I think. But the first one was interesting too. Let's have you pick somebody else.
I'll pick Kat.
That was a good question. I was honestly stuck on it because obviously those are the kids. So I did go for like incentives as well and like rewards. Maybe make it a fun thing. I know that like I work for an after school program as well. So we try to keep the kids engaged, and we try to get their opinion. So I would probably do like their voice and ask them what they want to do instead of just implementing it myself.
Okay, good. So they have an element of input, some way, shape, or form. Okay. I see Elizabeth has a hand up.
Raise their position. Let them compete over the next position.
Okay. All right. So there's a little bit of a variation in terms of jobs that's available to them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other ideas? Leah?
I don't know if this would be considered pay either, but maybe in turn, for example, do something with like, if they need childcare or something, they can bring their kids and have like a little daycare there. I don't know. I was trying to think of something and I couldn't, but something that would impact their family life or impact their home life so that they would be motivated to go to work.
Okay. That works. Okay. Other ideas?
Making them work in teams.
Okay. So something about working in teams might have some type of effect where they can build or draft off of each other's energy and ideas. Okay. So as Kat said, it's obvious that your company store is really the classroom, right? Because you can't pay them, you can't fire them, you can't give them time off. Although as a dean, I would give them time off for bad behavior because I had to suspend them sometimes. But realistically, that's the classroom. And the reason why I came up with the scenario was because I was working with a bunch of mostly guys, in fact, all guys, in a teacher intern training program who had just come from military bases. They were engineers and scientists who had been working on bases where they had been downsized. So they were going into teaching, and they had entered a district intern program. And I was trying to work with them and explain and understand the difference between a classroom and where they work, because in their work, they had line authority. So when they just gave an order, a command, or a wish, then people just did it. That's what I was trying to explain to them, is they have to understand that what are you going to do when you tell some 12 or 13-year-old kid what to do, and they turn around and tell you things about your ancestry that you never knew, you're going to have a problem, right? So we need to think about a strategic plan for how to organize under the aegis of not being able to pay, fire, or give time off. So that's where this scenario came from. And by the way, there's no wrong answers here to anything that you said. But it does deserve a little bit more explanation, because this is really the beginning of a strategic plan on how to organize your classes. So there's some points to be made here that I want to share with you. Question is, how do we organize for effort in a way that hides student efficacy, particularly for those students who are at risk but are at high potential? And potential can go in different ways. This little guy here may eventually become this guy here, right? So we need to think about how to address some of these concerns. So these are the more frequent responses that have come up when I do this scenario. One is, again, it came up here, the idea of incentives. But there are sometimes issues with incentives because coming up with an incentive that's going to incentivize every student may be a challenge. And the thing is, the question that I have to ask is, if we use the incentive programs, who are the students that are gaining the incentive? If they're the students who are satisfying their power needs through academics and they're getting an incentive, they would probably do fine without the incentive. But so, again, coming up with a question with an incentive that works for everybody is going to eventually be extinguished because they'll lose interest most of the time. And I mention this because I see the vans and the SUVs of teachers lined up in the doorways and driveways of Costco's and Sam's Club and Walmart's every start of every school year. And they're coming out with these big bags of candy, and they're running their classes like they work in the SeaWorld, right? So class, who can tell me what's the capital of California? And a kid says Sacramento, and a Jolly Rancher goes flying out across the room. The problem is that, again, when kids say, what do we get if we do this? Then you know that's been their background, that they've been incentivized to death. And so they're just always used to getting something. And they only do the work if we bribe them into actually accomplishing the work. So we need to somehow think about backing off these types of external motivators. Furthermore, it's hard to come up with incentives that will satisfy every kid. As the caption here says, hey, wait a minute, you're cleaning erasers as a punishment? I'm cleaning erasers as a reward, right? So what's an incentive and what's a punishment depending upon who you are? Another one that comes up is the idea of recognition. Student of the month or employee of the week. However, the problem with this is, again, goes to the question, who is earning this recognition? If it's only the kids who are my higher efficacy students, then I have a gap in terms of kids getting the recognition and kids who are not. And the bottom line is, kids seek recognition, but negative recognition is better than no recognition at all. So my idea of recognition is more of an eyeball to eyeball, getting in there and really interacting with the students, a lot of interface, student to teacher, student to student, and getting those connections to be really solidified, which again is a part of social emotional learning. Another one that comes up is the idea of praise. However, you have to understand your motivation behind praise. As Alfie Kohn says, if you're using praise as a mechanism to get the class to behave like so-and-so, that's probably a misuse of praise. However, praising students is always good, but I always recommend praising students in private, not in public, because if you praise somebody over the other class, you create a caste system in your classroom, and that's never a good thing. Another one that comes up is social recreational activities. Herein, we might understand a judicious use of incentive. I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm giving a test on Thursday, and if the class scores on 80% on average, meaning some will be above and some will be below, then on Friday they'll have their choice of 1 or 2 or 3 different activities that will have a recreational component to it, whether it's playing a game that has to do with the curriculum or doing an art project or something that they will have a choice of that is still tied to what it is that we're learning. The reason I mention this is because I had an English teacher once who, as a quote, reward for her class, brought in video clips of the then Los Angeles Raider highlights films, which was probably not conducive to an English class, unless she was teaching the concept of oxymoron, because there really were no Raider highlights that year. No offense to my Raider fans out there, okay? But that would be one way I could use incentives. Another one is the perception of employee input, where I could give them the perception that they have a say and an element of choice in what we're doing in the class, that we have challenge and interest, where the challenge is sufficient enough and scaffolded enough so that my novice learners are getting the right amount of guidance that they need, and not too little and not too much, just the right amount to get them to over the next hump so that they achieve mastery to go on to the next skill or the next item of instruction. And then one that doesn't come up often, it came up here, but the idea of team organization, where we put kids in participatory working structures to allow for the norms of cohesion and collaboration to evolve and develop, because that's when we begin to see the norms of collaboration and more of an environmental fit that's appropriate to adolescents in terms of their psychosocial development begin to arise. So again, as we say, the dream works when the team works, and that's the idea. So just to wrap up our thinking here, when we talk about the common responses to the prompt, we see here that we divide it up into two lists, and you can see that there's a distinction here between the left and the right. Anybody pick up what that is, what that distinction is? It's probably, you're overthinking it, but the difference is that one is extrinsic and the other one is intrinsic. And so when we think about building conditions for intrinsic motivation, which is what we ultimately want to get to, then we can think about how we begin to design our classrooms to fit this model and explore what it looks like. And that's what we're going to be getting into next week. Okay? All right. So for next week, we're going to do another foundational IQ from the reader. And you're going to find this on page 112. And the article, if you'll turn to the reader, you'll see it. It's called Principles of Instruction. And this will be our IQ for next week, which will be the last article in the reader. And we're going to begin a little bit of a deviation here, because after next week, we're going to be looking back at the VACA text, but I'm going to be doing stuff in class that's more along the line of getting ready for the type of content literacy instruction that we've been building up to. So we'll be deviating a little bit between the reading and the class. We'll still do IQ karaoke, though, so you'll have plenty of time to meet your requirements of 2. Additionally, I'll be emailing you a quick write after class tonight, along with a copy of School Days. I'd like you to look it over. If you feel that it's useful, then hang on to it, put it on your desktop and download it. It's all PDF. If you feel that it's not of use to you, then go ahead and just dispose of it as you see fit. But take a few minutes and just look through it, look at the table of contents, and then look at some of the stories that are in there and see if there's any that you think might be useful. And if you want to take it for a spin with your students, if you're able to, then go ahead and take it for a test drive and then give us feedback. In the front matter of the book, there's actually an explanation of how to actually do the instruction. In the back of the book, there's actually an instruction on how to create your own school day scenarios. Just a quick little anecdote. I had a student in my 521 one year before I'd written the book, but I was working on it, and I asked him, the class, if there's any problems that they'd like to work on to do a school days vignette. And he said, yeah, I like to work on my kids' use of profanity. Isn't that amazing that kids swear? I never would have thought that. Anyway, so I said, okay. So I wrote a vignette And the vignette is called, it's in the book, it's called She Said What? And it's about a teacher who loses her cool and she swears at a student. So after class, a boy and a girl are talking, and the boy is saying, man, did you hear what she said? I can't believe she talked like that to so-and-so. And the girl says, what are you talking about? You talk like that all the time. So it gets into the issue of situationally appropriate behavior and the use of language. And it's kind of an interesting, fun story. But as he was doing it with the kids, one of his kids raised his hand and he said, you're trying to brainwash us, aren't you? And he said, well, actually, yeah, I guess you could say that I am. That was kind of a funny response. Anyway, look it over. And again, if you find that there's no use for it, you may not have an immediate use for it because it may be useful when you hit your own classroom at some point in time in the future. But take a look at it. And if it's interesting to you, then go ahead and hang on to it. Okay, so that will be our class for tonight. The article is on page 112 in the reader, not 122.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to say 112.
Yeah,
It's principal's instructions, yes?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so that'll be our IT for next week. Okay. All right, folks. Well, thank you for coming to the broadcast tonight. I'll look forward to seeing you same time, same station, 521. I'll see you all next week. Have a good week and stay healthy.
And the quick ride's coming soon, yes?
Yeah, I'll send you the quick ride in about 15 minutes.